Four Muslim men had walked together into a supermarket in the US, but no one realized they had a lot of bombs strapped to their bodies. Immediately after that, 3 bombs exploded consecutively amidst the fear and panic of everyone. A mother tried to escape with her daughter, but when she turned back, she discovered the last Muslim man standing guard at the door. The woman slowly approached him and tried to convince the other person not to do anything, but the man did not give her any more opportunity to speak. Meanwhile, dozens of illegal immigrants attempting to enter the US were caught red-handed by a patrol force tens of kilometers away at the border. As the patrol team was counting the people, a man wearing a backpack suddenly rushed out of the crowd. Under the strong light of the helicopter, the man ran away in panic to the edge of the cliff. Seeing there was no way out, he calmly took off his backpack and began to reveal. It turned out that man was from the same group as the men who had just blown themselves up. Waiting until the border patrol team had surrounded him, he immediately detonated the bomb strapped to his body. 2 consecutive terrorist incidents resulted in dozens of deaths and injuries. In an instant, it exploded across major media outlets throughout the US. Even the Secretary of Defense had to urgently come forward to reassure the public. He affirmed that the US would never compromise or concede to terrorism, and that the mastermind behind this terrorist attack would pay with blood. A few days later, a US Navy SEAL special team secretly raided a pirate base in Somalia and successfully captured the pirate leader Bashir. The person in charge of this operation was Agent Matt. According to intelligence information, the group who carried out the terrorist attack at the supermarket a few days ago were all from Yemen. Due to US sanctions, they could not fly to Mexico. The only way to get there was to cross the border by sea, and all ships involved in Yemen's secret smuggling were controlled by Bashir. Matt wanted to get information about the sponsors of this group from Bashir, but he had principles and remained silent. Naturally a patient and taciturn man, Matt directly showed the other person a satellite photo of his mansion. He wanted Bashir to witness firsthand the entire process of his house being bombed, but this was just an appetizer. Afterwards, Matt switched to showing aerial photos of Bashir's family escaping by car. At this point, Bashir was pushed to the verge of a mental collapse by Matt, and could only meekly list the names of the sponsors. Having obtained the information, Matt immediately reported the situation back to Washington via phone. As expected, the group who carried out the terrorist attack were all members of the Al-Qaeda organization, and the one who helped them cross the border illegally was Carlos, the biggest drug lord in Mexico. After the meeting, Matt was urgently summoned to Washington and went to the Secretary of Defense's office at the Pentagon. The secretary and military leaders had been waiting there for a long time. Given the situation where Mexican drug cartels were organizing human smuggling into the US on an even larger scale, and moreover colluding with the Al-Qaeda organization, the senior leaders in Washington decided to launch a deep strike against the drug cartels. But since the US military could not directly conduct operations in Mexico, M., who had long served as a white glove for the White House abroad, was naturally the first person the leaders thought of. Knowing that Matt already had a plan of action, the military leadership immediately expressed their willingness to provide comprehensive equipment, but the agents had to be recruited by Matt himself. If the mission failed, there would be no allowed connection to the US government. With permission from the military, Matt immediately set about forming an action team. First, he sought out his old comrades, paid mercenaries, and acquired all sorts of technical equipment. Then, alone, he went to the capital city of Bogota, Colombia, to meet his old comrade, Alejandro. After hearing the enemy's name was Carlos, Alejandro joined M's team. The team was formed, and Matt immediately led everyone to Mexico City. First, they disguised themselves as assassins from Carlos's gang and killed the chief lawyer of the Mata gang, Adios, right on the street. Then they again disguised themselves as members of the Mata gang to attack Isabel, Carlos's daughter, on her way to school. They intercepted the escort convoy and finished off Carlos's only daughter right on the street. To ensure the effectiveness of the operation, they did not kill Isabel's escort bodyguards, but let them report the situation back to their boss, saying this was the consequence of provoking the Mata gang. They originally thought this would cause a massive brawl between the two drug cartels in Mexico, but unexpectedly, it led to an unforeseen development. While watching the video recording of the scene, Matt discovered that the two bodyguards they spared to deliver the message to Carlos had both been shot dead by a police officer after being clearly questioned. This policeman was also a member of the Mata gang. The situation suddenly became complicated. The plan to incite a war between the two gangs seemed impossible to achieve as intended. Therefore, the entire team immediately implemented the contingency plan. Alejandro commanded the group disguised as US police to successfully stage a scene for Isabel, where American police bravely rescued a kidnapped Mexican girl, then took Isabel back to the base and promised to return her after the investigation was completed. Just like that, Alejandro became Isabel's savior. Afterwards, Matt and Alejandro secretly met with an official in charge of U.S.-Mexico border issues, hoping the other party could coordinate with the Mexican side to escort Isabel back as soon as possible. But she was not to be handed directly to Carlos, but taken to the area controlled by the Mata gang. By then, simply revealing Isabel's whereabouts to Carlos's men would surely cause a confrontation between the two sides. After the exchange was completed, the two men drove back. Unexpectedly, in the parking lot, they almost collided with a high school student who suddenly ran out. This young man also seemed hot-tempered, but upon seeing Alejandro's terrifying eyes and hearing the alarm siren on their vehicle, he reluctantly left with a look of annoyance. Before long, the official in charge of border issues had sorted everything out. Matt immediately led the entire team to Mexico in 3 armed Humvees. To ensure safety, as soon as the convoy exited the border checkpoint, 7 armed pickup trucks of the Mexican police followed to escort them. Simultaneously, a U.S. military drone also flew with them throughout the journey, monitoring everything within a 10-mile radius of the convoy at any time. Everything went very smoothly, but as the convoy drove onto a dirt road at high speed, the dust flying into their eyes immediately obscured visibility inside the vehicles. Matt intended not to contact anyone to increase vigilance, but unexpectedly, the Mexican police escort in front suddenly turned around. At the same time, a missile flying at high speed directly overturned the armored vehicle behind. Clearly, the escorting police had been bribed by Carlos. Matt immediately ordered the drone to open fire and eliminate the ambushing missile shooter. Then, all team members got out of the vehicles and used the cover of the armored vehicle to fight the enemy. No one noticed the frightened Isabel, who had jumped out of the vehicle and quietly fled the scene. Not long after, Matt led the squad in eliminating all the Mexican police responsible for the escort. Immediately after that, they received a report from the drone that another group of Mexican police would arrive within 5 minutes. To prevent the situation from escalating, they had to return to the old road immediately, but when they got back to the armored vehicle, they discovered Isabel had long since disappeared. Matt intended to arrange for the team to go look for her, but was stopped by Alejandro because all the people who had just fallen were regular police officers. If they were caught by the Mexican police, it would certainly cause a diplomatic crisis. Therefore, Alejandro volunteered to stay behind to search for Isabel. Hearing this, Matt immediately gave his colleague a signal transmitter. If he could find Isabel, just by activating the locator, he would immediately lead the entire team to reinforce him. Afterwards, Matt led the team back to the old route. Facing the Mexican police cars pursuing from behind, he opened fire to try to stop them. On the other side, Isabel had escaped to another dirt road and intended to flag down a truck passing by. The person who got out of the car happened to also be one of Carlos's men who had attacked the convoy with missiles earlier. But Isabel was frightened by the blood on him, so she ran away, but she hadn't run far before she was caught. The other person tried with all his might to drag Isabel into the car, but unexpectedly a shot hit his head in the blink of an eye. It turned out that Alejandro had arrived in time. Afterwards, the two got into the assassin's vehicle and headed north, but they hadn't gone far when the car ran out of fuel and they could only walk in the vast desert. Fortunately, they met a kind, deaf-mute cattle rancher. Although he recognized Isabel as the kidnapped daughter of the drug lord, he still temporarily gave them shelter. Back at the base, Matt immediately got chewed out by his superiors. Although he was forced to do it, the lives of 20 Mexican police officers were clearly no small matter that could be casually concealed. Therefore, the secretary ordered Matt to terminate the operation immediately and cut off all ties with the U.S. to prevent the secret from being revealed. At the same time, those who witnessed the entire process of them shooting the Mexican police, like Isabel, also had to be silenced. Not only that, the identities of the two terrorist groups before were also thoroughly investigated. They all came from New Jersey, were Americans, and were completely unrelated to the drug cartels in Mexico. This also made Matt's provocation plan completely pointless. Although somewhat reluctant, Matt still called Alejandro's satellite phone to explain the latest situation and advised Alejandro to eliminate Isabel as soon as possible, otherwise he would also be in danger. But after spending a few days together, Alejandro saw Isabel like his own daughter, and she was also around the same age as her, so he fundamentally could not bring himself to do it. Furthermore, because they were now stuck deep within the territory of the Mata gang, Isabel could be finished off at any moment. Instead, Alejandro asked Matt to send someone to pick him up at the border first, and then discuss how to deal with the situation, but Matt chose to refuse the offer. By this point, Alejandro would have to find a way to get Isabel back to the US himself. Early the next morning, he took Isabel to a border town in the Nomad's truck. To prevent accidents on the way, he took off her shoe and put the signal transmitter inside it. Matt immediately determined the location information of the two. Afterwards, Matt, despite the objections of his superiors, led the squad to set off in the night to secretly bring the other two back. After a 2-hour drive, the two successfully arrived at the gathering place of the Gallo gang. After paying a transportation fee of $2,000, the two rested there and waited for a bus to enter the US via this route. Suddenly at this moment, a young man recognized Alejandro with just a glance while waiting for the bus. It turned out that was the young man who had almost collided with him in the supermarket parking lot a few days ago. Because he had heard the alarm siren on their vehicle at that time, he thought that Alejandro might very well be an undercover cop. Therefore, he recounted the incident to Gallo, but Gallo did not openly reveal it and still let the two get on the truck and leave. Waiting until the truck reached the border transit point, some henchmen disguised as immigrants immediately pointed guns at them. This was because Gallo, affiliated with Carlos's gang, had recognized Isabel's identity. Immediately after that, they took Isabel out of the vehicle. Although Isabel told Gallo that Alejandro was her father's subordinate, Gallo still suspected the other person was the one who had kidnapped her. Therefore, he hit him unconscious with a stick right on the spot. Afterwards, he covered their heads and took them to the suburbs. They intended to deal with Alejandro here to train courage for the new members. Gallo called over a young man who had just joined, but he didn't dare to shoot because he was too nervous. Seeing this, Gallo was so angry that he directly gave him a bullet to the head. Then, he called Miguel. "You were the one who spotted Alejandro." The lesson from the past was right before Miguel's eyes. He could only grit his teeth and shoot Alejandro in the head, then leave with his brothers. A few minutes later, Matt found Alejandro's body through the helicopter's night vision scope. The team members beside him were all glad they weren't the ones doing it, but Matt's eyes were filled with sadness and anger. After the logistics team confirmed Isabel's specific location, Matt immediately ordered the attack to be launched. Meanwhile, Miguel, who had just shot, was struggling nonstop because it was the first time he had done such a thing. Finally, unable to bear the trouble caused by his companions, he jumped out of the vehicle alone during the evacuation. Unexpectedly, this very action saved his own life. A few minutes later, the convoy escorting Isabel belonging to the human traffickers was destroyed by the helicopter. Facing the illegal immigrants who had surrendered, they shot indiscriminately and did not give anyone a chance to survive. However, Matt did not deal with Isabel as requested by his superiors. He carried the girl onto the plane and began the journey to protect the witness. Because this was the person Alejandro wanted to protect at all costs, he would certainly not let his brother down. On the other side, Alejandro suddenly woke up from a coma. It turned out he had only been hit on the cheek and just temporarily lost consciousness. Alejandro painfully dragged his body to the body of the deceased boy, used the boy's belt to cut the ropes binding his hands, and successfully escaped the gates of hell. Afterwards, he dragged his heavily injured body towards the highway to chase after Isabel. Not long after, he arrived at the scene of the incident, but discovered there was only a pile of bodies of the human traffickers in the vehicle. This must be M's masterpiece. Alejandro continuously searched around and quietly rejoiced when he saw Isabel's body was not there. He understood M's personality well. If Isabel was still alive, she must have been protected by Matt. Afterwards, Alejandro drove Gallo's truck south, but before long he faced another vehicle belonging to a member of the Gallo gang. Alejandro showed no signs of fear at all. He pulled the pin on a grenade and waited until Gallo's vehicle was beside him, then raised his hand and threw it over. A few seconds later, Gallo's men were immediately blown to pieces, while Alejandro continued driving south, gradually disappearing on the horizon.